Hello all, welcome to this session at Oracle Database World. Today I'm going to talk about Oracle Essbase integration with Oracle Autonomous Database. We will also talk about the strategy for Essbase and roadmap of some of the upcoming releases for Essbase. Hi, my name is Ashish. I am the Senior Product Manager managing Oracle Essbase within the Autonomous Database group. This session intends to talk about future product releases and some of the features and functionality that is planned to be delivered. However, some of the functionality may vary depending on our internal testing and so on. So let's talk about overview of the Essbase releases first, and we'll also look at some of the roadmap items. What you see on this slide is the different releases that we've had for Essbase over the last, I would say, couple of years. Initially, Essbase started out on the cloud as OCI Essbase. However, OCI Essbase no longer exists. Our strategy on the cloud was to deliver Essbase via the OCI Marketplace. The first version that we released was 19C, and that was pre-2020. It's been there on the cloud for almost 2 years now, and that was version 19C. However, the major release for Essbase, specifically for our on-prem customers, which we call independent deployments, released in December 2020 for Linux. This was a major upgrade since a long time for our on-prem customers. We also released in February 2021 the version 21C on our OCI Marketplace offering. This version included a lot of enhancements, a lot of requirements that our customers had asked for based on their OCI 19C usage. So all of those enhancements were included in 21C. Further, we released 21.2 patch set update, which was again a major release for Essbase in terms of the integration of Essbase with the Autonomous Database. This is the key for our session today as well. We will talk about how we started the journey on a tighter, deeper integration of Essbase with the Autonomous Database via the Federated Partition feature, which we call it as of today. What you see on the right is 2 red dots, which talks about the future releases that we have. The next major release or patch set update that we have on the cards is our 21.3 patch set update. This is also a major release specifically for our independent deployment or on-prem customers. It will address an additional platform support for Windows. A lot of our on-prem customers are waiting for that release. This release also has a lot of bug fixes, some key enhancements, which were again driven by our customers. The next patch set update, which is planned, is 21.4, which will build on our 21.2 release, where we started the journey for integration of Essbase with the Autonomous Database. We will add a lot of more functionality in the 21.4 release and improve the integration aspects that Essbase has with the Autonomous Database. As you can see, over the last couple of years, we have delivered a range of functionality on different deployment methodologies, which we call independent deployments and the marketplace or on the cloud. We have regular cadence in terms of quarterly patch set releases. We are working very closely with our customers to fix any gaps that they may see within the product when they upgrade from 11G to our latest platform, which is 21C. Moving on, so we talked about what we've done over the last couple of years. However, I want to address some of our existing customers that are on older Essbase releases. So let's talk about Essbase 11G first, which are mostly our on-prem customers. For Linux, our on-prem customers have a path forward for standalone Essbase deployments to move to 21C. Very soon we'll have our Windows release, so they can move to Windows 21C as well. However, if the customer wants to stick with 11G, then they have extended support available, provided they have both planning licenses as well as Essbase standalone licenses. EPM team also plans to update our 21C version, which is a project that is underway, and we are working very closely with them to make sure that they are successful in uptaking 21C. Coming to OCI Essbase, we already have a lot of OCI Essbase customers which have started with 91C or moving to 21C on the cloud. OAC Essbase is no longer available. Our existing customers should plan to move to 21C. For more details, they can refer to the doc ID that I have provided here. A note for our early movers to the OCI Marketplace is we have provided additional support for our 19C customers that are running Essbase on OCI. We will provide support until December 2022. However, we would request our customers plan their migrations to 21C versions as soon as possible, as 21C is a long-term release. So net of this discussion is all of our existing on-prem customers, existing OAC Essbase customers, or customers that are on 19C on Marketplace, you should plan to move to 21C, upgrade to 21C as soon as possible. Coming from a strategic standpoint, I talk about the integration of Essbase with the Autonomous Database. The Autonomous Database is becoming more richer in terms of data management, but also we are providing tools for various use cases or various persona to be able to easily load data into the database, derive insights from the data, build business models, as well as look at the catalog and browse through the different artifacts that they have within the Autonomous Database. So we are addressing different kinds of use cases or scenarios such as data processing, consolidation of data, collaboration of data among different users, and allow our users to be able to consume the data in a very business-friendly manner. With the integration of Essbase with Autonomous Database, we can add additional use cases such as planning and analysis so that the customers can leverage those capabilities with the data that exists in the Autonomous Database. With the integration of Essbase, customers also get the ability to do scenario management, what-if analysis, and so on. Moreover, they can also leverage SmartView, which is an Excel plugin, which gives an easy, intuitive, user-friendly query interface on top of the data that is residing in the relational Autonomous Database. So from a strategic viewpoint, we are adding more use cases to the Autonomous Database with the Essbase integration as well. With the release 21.2, we have added ability for Essbase to integrate with Autonomous Database. So we'll quickly look at the overview of this feature. With the introduction of Essbase integrating with Autonomous Database, we provide a lot of Essbase functionality that will now be available to our autonomous users. Essbase is a very powerful calculation engine. It understands financial functions, time intelligence, and it provides a lot of APIs for our users to build custom analytic applications on top of the data that already resides in the Autonomous Database. With Essbase, you can now perform powerful what-if analysis. Essbase also provides write-back capability. So what the users can now do, provided they have the right access within the Autonomous Database, is to be able to write back data from within Excel interface, which is SmartView, through Essbase directly into the Autonomous Database. This allows them to do planning, budgeting, and scenario management kind of activities. As I mentioned, SmartView provides an intuitive user interface for analysis, pulling the data directly from the Autonomous Database. If you look at the gamut of data consumption today, on one end, we have users that consume the data via SQL, that write complex SQL or PL SQL, extract the data from the database or do their analysis. The other extreme is tools such as Oracle Analytics or Power BI or Tableau that allows the users to visually interact with the data and derive their insights. However, with Excel, and again, Excel is a tool of choice for many users when they get the data, let's say in an email or download the data from the web. The first thing they do is stand up that data in an Excel spreadsheet and do their analysis. With SmartView, you now get the ability to be able to perform the similar kind of analysis that you do using Excel, but now with the data sitting in the Autonomous Database and the power of expressiveness that Essbase provides, so that you can easily query data in a business-friendly manner right from within a familiar Excel interface. So those are the benefits that our Autonomous Database users will get. From a multidimensional perspective or from an Essbase user's perspective, there are many benefits as well. Customers can leverage the data if they already have it in the Autonomous Database. They don't have to worry about loading the data into Essbase. With that, they get near real-time access to that data. In addition to these benefits, customers also get the power of the autonomous database. The autonomous database, powerful aggregation engine, so we can push the processing to where it can be done the best. Previously, any customers that had limitations in terms of the data sets that they could work with the integration of autonomous database, they don't have to worry about the volume of data that they have to deal with. So a quick note here is the first release for Essbase integration with the autonomous database is version 21.2, and this has limited capabilities. It can interact or it integrates with the autonomous database, but it can only do what we call rack and stack cubes, meaning all upper level members are dynamic and dynamically aggregated. However, we do plan to add features to this integration in the future, as I talked about in our roadmap slide. So look out for more features and added benefits that our existing Essbase customers will see, as well as our autonomous database users will be able to leverage in the future. Here's a quick schematic or overview of how this functionality works. Before we get into the demo, maybe it is helpful to understand this. What you see on the top is an Essbase application that you would create initially, and you would define the metadata. So let's say you have identified a fact table that resides in the autonomous database, and you want to do some analysis leveraging the features or capabilities of Essbase. At this point, you would define the metadata depending on the data that you have in the autonomous database. So you could define financial functions, you could leverage the calc engine or leverage the ability to be able to define the complex hierarchies within your business dimensions. So once you do the definition within Essbase, you identify the fact table in the autonomous database. You are now ready to define a federated partition within Essbase. We will look at a demo of this in a bit. Now, once you define the federated partition, we leverage a feature within the autonomous database called analytic views. This allows you to create those business hierarchies or add more metadata to the data that is already kind of relational or flat structured fact tables in the autonomous database into business friendly hierarchies. So you can define time dimension, geography dimensions, you may have product dimensions, and then you would add any business rules that you want to apply on these dimensions or how your calculations are done. That way you set up your federated partitions. Once you're done with that, you would then query the database via a familiar interface such as SmartView. At this point, the aggregations that are possible to be pushed down to the database are pushed to the database, and some of the outline aggregations, at least in the phase one, are done on the Essbase side. So we'll look at how users consume that data in a bit. Let's move over to a demonstration of federated partitions. So here we are on the OCI console marketplace to see how do you start working with the federated partitions. As a first step, users have to deploy a stack within our OCI. When you look at OCI Marketplace, we have two listings. We have BYOL, which is if a customer already has on-prem licenses, they could leverage the BYOL listings, or they could, if they want the universal credit option, then they choose the UCM listing. So in this case, I'll choose a UCM listing, and we can, depending on the version, you choose the stack and you launch the stack. I won't go through the details of deploying the stack, but one key thing that is required for this feature to work is at the point where you come with the database configuration. In order to be able to leverage the federated partition functionality, you need to have deployed an autonomous database that houses your data warehouse tables. So for example, you may have a data warehouse which has your sales information, your HR or operational information that you want to do your analysis on. You need to make sure that that autonomous database is deployed. And at the time of deploying the OCI Marketplace stack for Essbase, you need to choose this option, use existing database, choose the autonomous database, and then you can choose that database and then proceed further with the deployment of the stack. Okay, so that's one of the key requirements for deploying Essbase, leveraging the integration with autonomous database via federated partitions. So once you've done that, you can now come over to the Essbase interface, and you'll notice that we have already a couple of applications created. So we'll go through the steps of how you can start working with the Essbase. So I'll log into a data warehouse which already has my fact table on which I want to do more analysis. So you see I have a bunch of tables, but one table that is important for me for my analysis is what I call the finance fact. So I do a select star from finance fact just to look at how the data is structured. If you look at this table, I see that I have a product dimension, I have some market information, I have years, looks like mostly monthly level data in this, and I have a scenario which tells me there is actual data and there is prior year actuals data. And then beyond this, I have some metric columns which gives me information such as what is my sales for that month, for that market or state, and a product. I have cost of goods sold, marketing. These are some of the expenses. And I have some inventory related information also. What was the initial inventory? What were the additions and what about the sales and so on and so forth. So it looks like I have a fact table and I want to do the analysis on this. The first step, you've identified the fact table, and now you'll proceed further. The next step to build an Essbase metadata that adds more business value, kind of create hierarchies for my products, create hierarchies for, let's say, time dimension, and so on. Now, this can be easily done via another interface through Excel called Cube Designer. Here we have an easy way to define your dimensions. Here I have a year dimension, product, market, scenario dimension, as well as certain measures tagged as account dimension. Let's go ahead and build this application. Okay, already connected to that Essbase application, create the cube. The cube application creation is done. The application has been created. Let's do one thing. Let's analyze this cube, right? So I'll click on this option called Connect Query Sheets. I'll clear the contents and POV. Okay, so let me just quickly drill down on the year, and I see there is no data. Of course, there is no data because I have just only created the cube metadata, but I have not either loaded the data into Essbase, nor have I done what we call create the federated partition. I only see dimensions, the hierarchies on those dimensions and so on, but I don't see any data. Now we are ready to, now there are two options here. Either I can load the data into Essbase and do the analysis here, or leverage the new capability called Federated Partitions. So let's see how we can leverage that. If I come over to the web interface and if I refresh, I see that the new application that I just created is visible here. Now I'll go ahead and do what is required to hook up to the autonomous database. The first step is to make sure I go over to the sources and create a connection to the autonomous database. I have one that is already created here. So we just see how you create that connection. At the time when you're defining a connection, make sure you choose the autonomous toggle button and also check the repository database. This is a key step, and this ties back to the requirement that we had at the time of deploying the Essbase stack on OCI. Once you choose the repository database, the server is aware of the connection string information. So you should see these connection strings. For now, the recommendation is to choose low connection string. This is the connection to the data warehouse schema where fact table exists. So define a connection to the data warehouse and make sure that I'm able to connect. Looks like I'm able to connect. Just save this connection. And I'm now ready to define the federated partition on the SIM demo application that I've created. Come over to the database inspector. Choose the option partitions. Create a new federated partition. Under connection, choose the connection that I just created. Choose the fact table. Now I know the fact table is finance fact. Choose the finance fact. It has already pulled in the columns. So you'll see that it has identified there are these dimension columns or textual columns or attribute columns. These are some of the columns that have numeric, or this could potentially be the measures information. The user can choose what is a pivot dimension. A pivot dimension is dimension that has numeric information in my fact table. Recommendation for choosing a pivot dimension is to choose a dimension that remains static mostly throughout. For example, choose time as a pivot dimension, have Jan, Feb, March as columns in the fact table that have the measures information. Could directly have some metrics like sales, COGS, and that is the case in our example here, where we had looked at the fact table and sales, cost of goods sold, marketing, these are measures. In my example, I'm going to choose the measures dimension. As soon as I choose the measures dimension, you'll notice that it is trying to automatically map the columns from the fact table to the members within the Essbase outline. Now this has done the auto mapping based on the names. As soon as I choose the pivot dimension, it has identified the measure columns and mapped them to the relevant members. Of course, if I want to change any mapping, I can click the update button, and now I'll see my measures dimension. So I can choose whatever are the stored members. So in this example, sales is a stored member, and I can map it to sales, for example, here. You can manually do the mapping if the auto mapping doesn't work for you. Also map the 4-dimension columns that we have here: product, market, year, and scenario. Those are the 4-dimension columns. Will map to specific dimensions within the Essbase. So once this is done, I can add a description. Make sure you validate the partition. So partition definition is valid. At this point, you can now save and close to create the linkage of space metadata with the autonomous fact table. It says it will restart. That's fine. So the partition has been successfully created. So if I go back to the database and if I just refresh, I'll see that there are some metadata tables created by Essbase in that schema, as well as the analytic views have been created in the background. I have created the federated partition. Let's go back to the Excel spreadsheet here. Let me now just refresh. Notice that as soon as I refresh, I see the data that is coming directly from the autonomous database. So I can now hook up directly to the autonomous database and fetch the data. I can do a bunch of things from within this interface. This query is really giving me select star from fact table, group by time. Now, but you'll notice that I don't have quarterly definitions in my fact table. Done is I'm leveraging the expressiveness of Essbase to say, okay, I have only monthly level data in fact table, right? I have only Jan, Feb, March data. But now I want to add richness to this. I want to add, let's say, a time hierarchy as an example in this case. I have defined that metadata in Essbase, and I can now, so if I double click on quarter, for example, I can drill down into the Jan, Feb, and March. So you'll notice that I'm leveraging the power of Essbase to add certain business value to the relatively flat data that exists in the relational database. And I'm using a familiar Excel interface. I can drill down on product. So for example, double click on product. I have added hierarchy to my product dimension as well. I can choose to say, I'm only interested in doing my analysis on colas. So I can say keep only focusing on colas, and zoom in on colas. So I can select colas here and zoom in. Within colas, different kinds of colas: cola, diet cola, and caffeine-free cola. Now I'm focusing on a specific product and a specific time period. So I can choose quarters and the months, and I can say keep only. Okay, I want to focus only on these months. There's another way you can use Smart View is, for example, I have the market dimension. I have only state level data in my fact table, but I have added these additional metadata, do analysis by state or by region. So I can make sure I make those selections. I want to focus on all East states, right? Now the numbers are showing only for the Eastern states. Let's say I want to focus specifically on New York. I choose New York and I hit refresh. So now I'm looking at numbers only for New York. So I have data only for cola in New York. I can also focus only on current year actuals or prior year actuals, for example, right? So I can now focus on current year actuals and I refresh. I'm looking at actual sales for colas in New York by different time periods. Another way to look at this data, I can now say, for the sake of easiness, I can say keep only cola. double click on measures to drill down on my measures. I can choose to pivot. So I can put colas in columns, and I can move measures dimensions on the left to go by what are the different entities here. My example, let's say I want to fix on only profit-based analysis. I can say keep only profit. Also, I want to, for now, focus only, or I want to pivot my time to columns. I can choose profit and I say zoom in all levels. I am looking at sales numbers for Cola actual Jan 678. This is the data. All the green cells are the rows that exist in the fact table. If I were to write select star from finance fact where product is 110, which is Cola, I have enhanced the metadata. I had product codes in my fact table, but have added what we call aliases in Essbase. So now I'm using a business friendly way of looking at this information. So Cola's New York Jan actual is 678 and cost of goods sold is 271. So I'm actually looking at these two numbers that are coming directly from the fact table, and it is highlighted through these green highlighted cells. So these are information that is coming directly from the fact table, but then I've added more business logic. So for example, these blue numbers are really what the richness or the richness that Essbase adds. Margin is the sales minus cost of goods sold. Total expenses are summation of the marketing, payroll, and miscellaneous expenses. And profit is margin minus total expenses. So you'll notice that I've added more business rules on the Essbase side to be able to do the analysis. So now let's look at some of the more features that Essbase adds. So this is another grid or another example that I've created, but I want to show some more capabilities that Essbase provides. So let's look at this example. For example, this is inventory related information, right? In my fact table, I have two inventory related columns. I have initial inventory and additions. Now, when you are doing inventory related aggregations, you don't simply aggregate inventory, or in another example would be you don't aggregate balances. You don't add up all your balances for Jan, Feb, and March and show it as your quarterly balance. No, that's not the way how these metrics work. These are non-additive metrics. Here is an example. In January for New York Cola, I started with 2101 as my initial inventory. I did have some additions and I had some sales. So my ending inventory has a business rule which tells start with the opening inventory plus the additions minus any sales that I have done to give me the ending inventory. So that's how this number gets calculated here. However, when you see additions, if I sum up these three numbers, that comes up to 2005, and that's a valid aggregation for the quarter level. But the aggregations for opening inventory doesn't work that way. Opening inventory for the quarter is the opening inventory that I had in Jan. The ending inventory for quarter is the ending inventory in March. We have added time intelligence to make sure, or Essbase understands, a quarterly opening inventory is defined the way it is here. Similarly, if I go up to the year level opening inventory will be the opening inventory for Jan, and the ending inventory for at the year level is ending inventory in December. You'll notice that how we can add this kind of business intelligence or time intelligence to the data that is residing in the fact table. So now we will look at some other additional capabilities that Essbase provides, like being able to do planning or forecasting. So here is another example where I am looking at all the metrics, all the accounts or all the measures for Cola, New York, and actual. These are my numbers that I've seen earlier. And it also has prior year actual numbers. What I have done is I've created a business rule as a forecast member, which is an average of the last 2 years. So this number here, 659, is an average of prior 2 year sales, prior 2 year costs, and so on and so forth. So all of these other metrics are averages of the prior 2 years. What I have also done is I've created a what if member that allows me to do some what if analysis. And this what if analysis will be based on certain drivers. And those drivers are defined as input data here. So let's take a look at a quick example here. What if sales increased by 5%? So I can change this to 1.05, reduce on my costs that I incurred based on the goods that I sell. I can leverage another capability of SmartView called Adjust. Decrease the selected cell value by 5%. Adjust the data. Now I'm coming to a scenario where I'm saying I want to see what happens when I increase my sales by 5% and decrease the cost for those sales by 5%. And I submit the data. Notice that there are numbers that have changed here, and let's go through those. In what if scenario, based on the forecasted numbers, if I anticipated a 5% increase in sales, I have the absolute number as 691. I've added two additional members, which tells me the variance in absolute terms and in percentage terms. This makes sense. Both of them, the sales and costs, I varied it by 5%. So this makes sense to me. And these are the absolute values that correspond to that change. Now, notice here an additional thing. Even though cost reduced, the absolute numbers are showing positive. So this is another intelligence, or the financial intelligence that Essbase has, or it understands the variance. A negative variance for cost is actually good. So it adds up to numbers when I do reporting. So we can understand this in a simple way by saying, I want to say, let's say the cost actually increased by 5%, right? Let's submit this data. And now you'll notice that it's a negative number. So an increase in cost has a negative impact on my balance sheet, for example, right? So let's revert this back to 0.95 and submit data. And now you'll see that a reduction in costs is a positive impact on my balance sheet, right? It's a positive impact on my profit. Now you notice this is the impact of the change that it has for the sales and cost. So overall, I will see in the New York, profit will increase by 18% because of this change. Now let's look at another example of how Essbase can be leveraged for allocations. In this example here, I'm using an input driver to allocate the total expenses to the three heads of expenses that I have: marketing, payroll, and miscellaneous expenses. I'm looking at these kind of expenses are increasing, right? The payroll of my employees increases. There are some marketing events that I want to run. So let's say if I increase these expenses and submit the data. So notice now that I'm actually allocating the number 160 in a ratio how the 150 was allocated to the three expense heads that I have. So now I have allocated this number 160 in the same ratio for these three expense heads. And they of course have certain impact. So now earlier I was seeing an 18% increase just in New York, but now I see it has come down to 14%. So some of these expenses are back to all profits. However, notice also I'm looking at Eastern level data. So this is just New York, but I'm also rolling up at the same time and getting these numbers for the entire Eastern region. Or I could add the market here. So I can say cola market. And this is like writing SQL query actually, right? But in a very simple way. I want to look at my variance numbers at the market level. What is the impact it has? So I just add those members and refresh, and I get the numbers at the market level. Now, overall, depending on the data that I have, I see that the market level variance is changing quite a bit. But anyway, so you get the idea. So now you can actually do your planning, budgeting, what if scenario, right from within an Excel interface. Okay. So now I'm having another measure that I have created called market rank. Okay, and this ranks the market based on the sales that each state has performed. So now I see that the Western region seems to be the leader in terms of the sales, and followed by Central, followed by East, and followed by South. So now I'm looking at the rank at the region level. But what if I want to go down state level? So I can double click on, let's say, Central, and now I'm looking at the ranking based on the sales at the state level. in context, I'm able to derive these metrics by simple user interface click-throughs. In terms of the central region, Illinois brings in the highest revenue, followed by Iowa and other states. Within the context, you can get these measures because Essbase understands these hierarchies and it can do much more than doing this. So if you had to see this report and write a SQL, this can be done in SQL, but it will be a complex SQL to write. Quick response to your data, you can easily manipulate your report and look at the other numbers once you understand how the Essbase outline is set up. That was the demonstration for the federated partitions. Let's move on to the presentation. I did talk about the first release that we have, which is 21.2 release. It is available on OCI Marketplace, and you can play around with it. But let's look at some of the benefits of the federated partitions, specifically, let's say, for an Essbase user, for example. So the benefits are, of course, obvious. You do not have to go through these batch processing of loading data into Essbase, and if there is any changes in the metadata, there are restructures that happen on the Essbase side. Also, because now we are leveraging the autonomous database, you can work with larger data sets, leverage the in-memory caches that the autonomous database provides through these analytic views that we've defined in the autonomous database. From a database user perspective, they can now add the expressiveness that Essbase provides to the flat data that exists in the relational structures. These are really not having any business rules defined. So you can define those business rules on top of these data structures that exist in the autonomous database and do your analysis quickly through an Excel interface. Now, some of the cautions we have at this point are, of course, not all Essbase functionality is available in the current release via the federated partition. So any Essbase user that plans to use this maybe have to wait. However, depending on the demo that we've seen, and if you have some rack and stack cubes and you have large data sets that you want to work with, this is something you could try. As I mentioned, there are limitations, so calculation scripts are not available, and some outline-based calculations are still executed on the Essbase side. So we are working towards shipping those as much as possible to the autonomous database, and our goal is to push maximum processing back to the autonomous database. What are the key takeaways from the session today? Number one, we have a lot of users on different versions of Essbase on different platforms. We have a solution for all of these existing customers, and the messaging is upgrade to 21C as soon as possible, because that's the latest and the greatest. All the innovations are happening in that release. 21C itself has several key enhancements. Of course, over our on-prem deployments or on-prem versions 11G, a lot of changes there. Even for 19C customers that are on OCI Marketplace already, we do have a bunch of enhancements and several bug fixes. We are gearing towards providing a lot more greater enhancements. You've seen how we have been following kind of a regular cadence, quarterly cadence of patches and major releases that we've done in the past. We want to make sure that we continue this momentum and add more features to the product, improve the integration with autonomous database in our future releases. And purely from an integration standpoint and federated partitions perspective, these are great, right? Because you now leverage the best of both worlds. You leverage the best of the relational world, that is the Oracle database, and best of the multidimensional world, which is Essbase. So from an Essbase user perspective, you avoid expensive restructures. You can do near real-time data work with larger data sets, leveraging the autonomous database. With this integration and the data actually being stored in the autonomous database, we take on the reliability and the scalability aspects of autonomous database that are available to us. We can add these additional use cases for Essbase. If you are simply wanting to maybe put a spreadsheet on top of your data warehouse, you can quickly build a federated partition, leverage Smart View, and query the autonomous database directly from Excel without having to write complex SQLs or developing complex applications. For an autonomous database users, you now get the expressiveness of Essbase. You can define your business rules. You get the powerful calculation engine capabilities that Essbase has to provide. You can have curated business models. You can define, let's say, your general ledger accounts, your balance sheets accounts can be defined leveraging the expressiveness of Essbase. I talked about Smart View to be able to query and write data, and you can run simple planning scenarios as you see fit based on the data that you have in your autonomous database. That was the session today. Thank you for spending your time with me understanding the new feature for federated partition that we have introduced. Have a good day. Bye.